okay? My sounds all right? And you can see my screen now? Okay, awesome. All right, welcome to Boost Your Motivation with Values Visualization for personal, professional, and creative work. So I assume most of you know me, but for those of you who don't, or it's your first time, my name is Nick Wignall. Nice to meet you all. You probably know me from my newsletter, The Friendly Mind, but I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I worked for a long time as a therapist working one-on-one with folks, primarily with anxiety and insomnia issues, but a range of stuff. And for the last few years, I've been working for a small startup in the kind of corporate well-being and culture building space. And then on the side, I do, as you guys know, I write, and I used to podcast more than I do, hoping to get back to that more, but I teach courses, I teach workshops, and write a lot of articles and all that kind of stuff. And that's really my passion, is taking what we know about from kind of the clinical and academic world about psychology and mental health, and applying that to the kind of non-clinical setting. So in other words, everybody experiences anxiety, for example, right? But not everybody has an anxiety disorder per se, right? So but a lot of things we know about how anxiety work, it applies to all of our kind of everyday struggles with things like anxiety or low motivation or self-esteem, all these types of things. So that's what I'm really interested in, and it's why I do a lot of what I do. Speaking of motivation. And like I said, I live in Albuquerque. That's my little family, not so little family, my wife and my 4 kids. A few disclaimers in housekeeping: not mental health or medical advice. It's for informational and educational purposes only, what we're going to talk about today. Motivation and values are enormous topics. Like, they're huge. There's no way you could even hope to cover 5% of that stuff in an hour. So just keep your expectations kind of in check. Like, we're going to talk about specific aspects of both of those two things, but it's an impossible task to kind of cover all of that. Emotional intelligence versus emotional fitness. If you followed me for any time whatsoever, it's one of my points that I harp on all the time, which is emotional intelligence, which is understanding how your emotions and moods and thoughts work, is wonderful, but it's not all that helpful without its counterpart, which is emotional fitness, which is actually putting things into practice. Okay, so it's easy to fall into the trap of, I'm going to learn some new ideas and then ... hopefully change. Doesn't work like that, right? Learning is only there to enable the fitness, the action part, putting things into practice. So when it comes to using values visualization to help with motivation, I'm going to teach you a very specific technique in the back half of this. And so it's about putting that into practice. We'll talk about that specifically today, some tips on how to do that, but keep that in mind. Confidentiality, I'm more than happy to answer questions. You're welcome to share. I always appreciate that, but just keep in mind, this isn't public, but for anyone who purchased and there's 70 or 80 people who actually purchased it who couldn't show up today, it will be visible to all those folks. A note on notes, people always ask about this, but my recommendation is, because you'll have the replay available for a while, I wouldn't worry about like taking notes, or at least not like crazy amounts of notes during the session. I mean, you can jot little things down here and there, but I would focus on really just kind of being present and really thinking about and internalizing things. You can always go back if you miss something and look at the slides and catch something in the replay, okay? And then a quick little PSA about my philosophy of how to be a good student for these types of things. I have two major criteria. The first is, I would encourage you to be what I call open-minded skeptics. So I'm going to be presenting some stuff. Some of it might be a little counterintuitive, so I'd encourage you to be open-minded to stuff that seems a little bit off or strange, but also be skeptical. If something doesn't sit right, if you're like, I don't know about that, raise your hand. Real or digital, raise your hand, bring it up, it's okay. That's actually really good. That means you're actually thinking and engaging. So I want that. I want those questions. I want that skepticism, okay? And then the second point is, aim to be a good enough student, not a perfect student. It's not going to happen. There are no perfect students. Don't get perfectionistic about these things. What matters is that you just get started, and don't worry about getting everything perfect. Perfectionism is often just another form of procrastination from getting started. So, hi, Aaron, welcome. Saw you just hopped in. You didn't miss much. We're just getting started.
Okay.
So now I'm going to ask you all, grab a pen and paper if you don't mind. We're going to be definitely doing some writing today. These are called workshops for a reason. They're not just classes. You guys are going to be doing some work. So if you haven't already, grab pen and paper. I'll give you a second, and then we're going to dive in with our first little mini activity.
Hey, Nick, do you want us to have our audio on or off? I mean, my mic.
Oh, probably off generally, but if you want to say something, feel free to just come off and say something.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Sure. Okay, so I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. All I want you to do is just sort of brainstorm. No right answers, just whatever's in your head, try and get it out. And I just want you to think about where are places in your life where you wish you were more motivated, okay? And you can think about it in terms of these 3 categories if you want. You don't have to, but I think they're kind of helpful. Personal life, your professional life or work, and your creative life or work. And remember, it's brainstorming, quantity over quality. You're not writing essays, you're just getting ideas out. So just think of situations, tasks, projects, anything really where you wish you had more motivation. Okay, this is going to be really helpful. Having really pertinent examples from your own life is going to really help you to sort of internalize and resonate with the topics that we talk about. That's the real reason for doing this. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to give you a couple more minutes to do this, and then we'll push on. Okay, another 30 seconds or so. And remember, we're brainstorming just places in our life where we wish we had more motivation. Okay. Does anyone want to share? Sometimes it's kind of helpful. You definitely don't have to, but if you have 1 or 2 examples of places where you'd like more motivation, you want to share in the chat, it can be really helpful, I think, to see other people's, just to kind of share and see from each other what we're all kind of working on. So go ahead if you want to.
I can give mine.
Yeah, go ahead, Erin.
Okay. In personal life, well, actually, it wouldn't take too long. I was just going to write the word everything, but I'm trying to be a little more specific. Just a daily routine, getting up at the same time, going to bed at the same time, doing little chores or not just sitting and taking a break so much. So I really want a routine, and I know it would be better for me and consistent daily walking, things like that. My professional life, I'm trying to I'm working at doing voiceover work, and I've gone through a lot of the hard stuff of actually starting, And now I should be more aggressive and follow through, but I get so overwhelmed or so.
Yeah, that term follow through is something that comes up a lot in these topics of
Yes,
motivation.
the follow through, and when it's weird, your brain knows what to do, but your body just doesn't do it. I don't know why.
Yep. Thank you, Erin.
Mhm.
I appreciate it. And see, Lowell put a few things in the chat. Need that emotional fitness. Yep. Anyone else quickly want to share anything? No pressure, but if you want to. Going to the gym, staying organized. Yep. Eating healthy. Be more creative in my cooking. I wish I'm not into cooking, but I love to bake, Carmen, and I wish I had sort of made more time to do creative baking. Paige, violin. Awesome. My 8-year-old daughter really wants to learn how to play violin. We're working on it.
He absolutely should, but don't expect it to sound good for at least 3 years.
3 years. Oh man. Okay. That's good. That's good to know. Good expectation setting. Joni, pick up the guitar more. Yep. Love it. Retirement planning, cleaning. Yep. Writing more. Ganesh, taking more risks. Yeah. Being proactive. These are great, you guys. Okay. So I think you guys can see a lot of, there's a lot of similarities here, you know, like there's nothing new under the sun in a lot of ways. It's kind of nice to know we're all struggling with similar stuff. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some theory about maybe a slightly different way of thinking about motivation that I think is going to be really helpful when it comes to getting more motivated. Because I think part of the reason why we struggle with motivation is actually because we don't think about it entirely accurately. Our sort of models or metaphors for motivation don't always align super well with how it actually works. So I'm going to present a sort of my model for how motivation often works. And then we're gonna practice this exercise called values visualization, which has to do with utilizing personal values as a way to enhance motivation. So let's jump in. So how do we usually deal with low motivation? You're trying to do something, you know you should do something, what happens? Unfortunately, a lot of the time, it looks like a lot of this stuff, right? We end up criticizing ourselves, or we start procrastinating or avoiding something. We do the kind of like drill sergeant thing, like, I just got to get tough with myself. I just got to push through, right? External rewards, you know, we kind of dangle the carrot somehow. And while all these things occasionally work in the short term, that's part of why we keep doing them, because every once in a while they actually sort of work. What they tend to do, even though they kind of work in the short term, they actually tend to make things worse in the long run, right? So like if you criticize yourself, it might give you a little boost and you might get something done, but the damage you're doing to your self-esteem and your confidence overall, it's going to be a net negative almost every time. Same with getting tough with yourself, all that kind of stuff. It tends to be, it kind of like a lot of things in life, it kind of works in the short term, but it makes things worse in the long run. So these things unfortunately don't work super well, but for a lot of us, that's kind of like our default, like we don't have great options, right? So we sort of fall back to these things. Even we probably know on some level they're not super great and helpful. But there is another way, which is why you guys are here. And before we get to that specific way, we're going to talk a little bit about how motivation works. In particular, this is what I call the gravity model of motivation. So if you think about motivation, you imagine yourself as the little rocket ship there, right? And you've got a goal that you're heading towards. And so maybe your goal is something like, I remember someone talking to me once about their goal was to, when they got to work in the morning, they wanted to do the most difficult tasks they had for that day right away, like get it done and not procrastinate on it. That was their goal, right? So this is kind of how we think about it. It's like, okay, here's my goal. You know, this is like the night before. Like, all right, tomorrow I'm going to get there. I'm going to get to my thing. I'm going to do the hard thing first. Great, we're cruising along. But then what happens? We lose motivation, or it feels that way. And what's really happening is it's not so much that we lose motivation as competing goals pop up. Okay, and this is really counterintuitive, actually. So you get to work, you're about to start working on the tough thing, but you feel a little anxious about like, I don't really know where to start, or what am I supposed to do first? And then you almost by magic, your hand starts reaching for Instagram, right? Or you say, oh, I'm gonna check some emails first, or whatever it is, right? So what's going on here? You're ironically, you're not actually losing motivation. You actually have more motivation. It's just pointing in the wrong direction. So in this sort of model, the like engine on your rocket, this is like willpower, sort of pushing yourself to do something, right? In the grand scheme of things, that's actually a relatively small psychological force. It doesn't exert that much energy. What really affects things is the gravity of your goals. How much are your goals pulling you toward them, pulling your actions toward achieving them? Now, in the absence of any competing goals, like all you need is a little willpower and the gravity of this goal, right? But that's almost never how life works, right? We've got a goal, and intellectually we're like, yes, this is important. I'm going to do the biggest thing first. But the messy reality is competing goals pop up all the time. And often, because those competing goals are more immediate, they're much closer to us. Even though we know intellectually this goal is bigger, is more important, because it's further away, right, in the future, it exerts less gravity, less motivating pull on us. And so that's why this explains that frustrating thing where we're like, I know what I should do. Someone said it in one of the shares, like, I know what I should do, but I keep doing, I should go for a walk, I should exercise, but I watch Netflix instead, or I should get my biggest project done, but I check email and get lost in that instead, right? What's going on? I know what I'm supposed to do. Well, this is it. It's because competing goals are popping up and pulling you away from your primary goal. So again, you're not losing motivation, you actually have too much motivation. In a lot of ways, that's kind of the way to think about it. Now, so what's the solution to this dilemma? Well, you could try to just minimize and get rid of competing goals. And that's not actually a terrible strategy. There are some goals where if you've got a super distracting office, right, you could maybe try to get rid of distractions or work in a place that has fewer distractions, right? It's not a bad idea, but it's only going to get you so far, because like there are always going to be competing goals. Just thoughts are going to pop into your head, right? And those can be competing goals. I think the way out of this solution, this dilemma, is values, and we're going to talk about what values are specifically. But the big idea here is if there are competing goals that are pulling you away from your primary goal, you can increase the pull of that goal. Which is another way of saying you can increase your motivation to move toward that goal by attaching a value to it, a personal value to it. And what this is like is like in the kind of like space metaphor here, you're heading towards this planet, right? But there's this other planet that's close to you that because it's closer, it's pulling you away. But what if not only was there a planet there, but there was a huge star right next to it? The overall like mass would definitely outcompete this competing goal, right? And so you would end up making your way there anyway. Now notice the amount of like fire coming out of your tail fins there is not any different, right? You're not like gritting your teeth and like pushing yourself harder. That's such a tiny amount of energy in the overall system here. That's not a sustainable strategy for increasing your motivation. It's like pushing yourself harder. The trick is to set up your environment, so to speak, such that you have more motivation pulling you toward your goals. And a really great but underrated way to do that is to attach values to your goals. Now, what's cool about this too is you can do this with any goal. So there's some goals that are like, that we're intrinsically motivated. We just love the thing. Like ask a kid if he or she has to be motivated to play video games. Like, no, they just do it because they love it, right? But ask an adult if they have to be motivated to file their taxes. Yeah, like we're gonna drag our feet on that one, or like organize the office, or whatever it is. There's a lot of things that just don't seem very intrinsically motivating. So are we just doomed to never be able to get up much motivation for those? No, you can actually attach values to the most mundane, boring, seemingly insignificant goals or tasks. And as a result, feel much more motivation to move toward those and accomplish them. Okay, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. So in this example, remember, like, okay, the goal was do the biggest task as soon as you got to the office, right? But competing goal was social media or checking email or I don't know, whatever it is. What if you attach the value of, and I remember this story from a former client of mine, he said what he ended up doing, the value he attached to it was quality time with his family, specifically quality time with his daughter. He had a daughter who loved to read. And this one day he came in and we were talking, he said, man, it was heartbreaking. I got home late one night, just before my kids were going to bed. And my daughter said, like, Daddy, I really wish you could get home earlier and read to me more. And he was just like, oh, I just melted, because I should have been able to get home earlier, but I spent hours basically procrastinating. And so the value he attached to this goal of getting his hardest thing done in the morning was quality time with his daughter, reading specifically. So the next day when he went there and inevitably got, sort of distracted or pulled away from that goal, he took a moment and reminded himself of the value behind that goal of getting his stuff done and not procrastinating. And that was enough to kind of pull him out of the gravity of the competing goal and get him toward his goal. Hopefully that kind of illustrates a little bit of how this model works. Now, I introduced this term value. It's a huge term. People define this term a lot of different ways. So I want to try and clarify things a little bit before we press on. I'm going to talk specifically of personal values. And I call them personal values because there's a whole thing about, like, are there like just sort of individual preferences, and are there like objective universal values that apply to everyone? Like, I don't want to get into that. This is not a philosophy class. Personal values are things that you value, right? Maybe someone else does, maybe they don't. It doesn't matter, right? They're important to you. So that's what a personal value is. They're principles or ideals, and they're not just like fuzzy, abstract philosophical things. They have a real impact in our lives because they guide our behavior, especially in difficult situations or circumstances, or at least they're capable of doing that if we're attentive to them. Okay. Now, values is different from a process called values clarification. Values clarification is when you reflect on and deepen your understanding of your personal values. So the clearer you are about your values, the more motivation you will have to make good decisions in your life, even in the face of competing goals or tasks, temptations, we call them sometimes, right? So when you clarify your values, the clearer they are, it's like, think about the metaphor. People often use the metaphor of like the North Star is kind of like a metaphor for your values, your principles, or your ideals, right? And the idea is the North Star, it shines a light, right? It literally shows you the direction that you should be moving. But what's cool, it goes back to the space metaphor here. A star doesn't only give light. It doesn't only show you the right way to move. It literally exerts gravity on you, right? So, and that's the thing I think people don't understand about values is they don't only show you the correct kind of path to go in the face of competing goals, but if you clarify them, they pull you, they provide motivation, okay? And then values visualization is this exercise for boosting motivation, intrinsic motivation for any goal or task by discovering and clarifying a relevant value to that particular task or goal. Okay, and that's the exercise we're gonna run through. So keep this in mind. Remember this: personal values, they both inform but also motivate good decisions. And that's what we're talking about here, right? It's like, I get to work and I want to do the most important thing right away instead of checking social media. Like, I know what the right decision is here. The right decision for me is to like do the work, right? And not to like hop on Instagram. So values are really important because they not only remind me of what the right thing to do is, but they actually increase my motivation to do the right thing and make it easier that I actually follow through on that. Okay, so it's really powerful. Okay, so values visualization. This is an exercise that comes out of sort of two bodies of work. One is like what's called values work, which is basically like exploring and the sort of psychology of values and personal values and using those in a variety of ways to improve our lives. But also the work on visualization in performance and sports in particular. So athletes and performers of all types have been using what's often called positive visualization for a long time to increase performance. So you think, I remember seeing when I was a kid, seeing an interview with Michael Phelps talk about how he had this routine where he literally visualized every stroke that he was going to take on his race. And what you're doing there is you are literally priming your brain, making it easier for your brain to take those actions in the future. It's basically dress rehearsal, right? Like why do actors or people in plays like rehearse before the performance? The more you practice it, right, the easier it is. You're building muscle memory, right? So values visualization sort of combines those two bodies of work, and you'll see how what this looks like. It has basically 3 steps. Once you get good at this and you practice it a lot, you can basically skip straight to step 3. But when you're first learning this, it's a good idea to work through all 3 steps. The first step is values discovery. So I think we all, if I said, do you have values? Like, I think everybody here would say, like, yeah, sure, right? If I said, what are your values? You'd be like, I don't know, honesty, creativity, right? Friendship, I don't know. Like, it's actually it's not something we think a whole lot about most of the time, or most of us don't anyway, right? So it takes a little work actually to kind of discover what our values actually are, especially ones that are relevant to a particular goal. Values writing, this is a process for really clarifying values, because values start off as just concepts, but what we want to do is make them really real, really tangible, gritty, sticky, spiky, right? Think of like a good story, right? All good stories, movies, novels, whatever, they have, it's the detail that makes them compelling. And then visualizing the value in action. This is like the positive visualization. This is Michael Phelps visualizing how he's going to swim the race 10 minutes before the race itself. Okay. So what I'm going to do is we're going to walk through, I'm going to show you the process, and I'm going to have you guys walk through it. And we'll do it 1 or 2 times together so that you can kind of experience what it's like. And then we'll have time to answer questions as well. So the first step, values discovery. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to share, I'm going to send you guys a link real quick. Okay, so this will pull up a PDF, and the first page is kind of instructions on how to do this whole process. Okay, so you'll have this. I'll send it around in an email too afterwards. But the second page is this list of personal values. Now, this is just a list. I made it up based on other lists of personal values I've seen. It's not comprehensive by any means, right? There's probably tons of things on here that you would put on here that aren't on here. Maybe things you would remove. It's just a place to start, okay? So what you would do is, let's say your goal is to exercise more consistently. The first thing you would do is you take a values list like this and you'd scan it quickly, right? You're not reading a novel here. You're just quickly scanning it, and you're going to mark a handful of values that are relevant to that goal of exercising consistently. You don't overthink it. That's the key here. So you can imagine someone saying, well, yeah, fitness for sure, health, adventurousness, self-respect, vitality. So you guys can see those all, like, in some ways, those are somewhat relevant to the goal of exercising more consistently, right? You don't have to have a perfectly reasoned out argument for why those matter. You just have to have kind of a sense that they're relevant to that goal. Then the next step is values writing. So you're going to write a little bit about, you're going to take those 2, 3, 4, 5 values that you circled that might be relevant to your goal of exercising consistently, and you're just going to write a little bit about them. Okay, this is like free writing. So let's say you picked adventurousness. Now, that's kind of an interesting one. It's not, it's not totally obvious how that's related to exercising consistently, but look at this. So I've always loved being adventurous, exploring new places, hiking, camping, being spontaneous. It's a big part of my relationship with my wife. We fell in love going on adventures together. But I'm too out of shape now to do much of it anymore. Bingo, right? So now you can see why there's this really important value in someone's life. And it's relevant because if they exercise more and were better in shape, they'd be able to be more adventurous and go on more adventures, which is super important to them, right? And you can see there's another one there, health as well. So another example, let's say your goal is to publish a book, right? So same thing, skim the list, which values pop out to you that are relevant to publishing a book? Challenge, creativity, learning, usefulness, wealth. Okay, so you do that pretty quickly. Then you do a little writing. Remember, this is like a few sentences each, right? I mean, you could write more if you wanted to, but the point is, you're not writing essays here. It doesn't have to be long. So creativity. I love the feeling of putting in lots of hard work and then having it pay off in the form of a new thing existing in the world. I love taking good ideas and putting them my own spin on them and watching as that uniqueness helps other people who wouldn't normally appreciate it. So you see how you're taking something abstract, creativity, and you're making it like you're giving detail and specificity as to why it matters for, like what it looks like and why it matters for you in your life. If you asked 100 people to write about their value of creativity, you get a lot of different answers, right? A wide variety, which is great, which is wonderful. The point here is you're just finding why it matters to you, which is it's going to be totally different than for someone else, probably. Or in this one, wealth. This is an interesting one, right? To me, wealth means I don't have to constantly worry about money. I don't have to be rich, but I want to be I want enough wealth to be free from financial strains. Maybe freedom is another value I have. Wealth also means I get to follow my creativity more freely. Okay, that's interesting. So what you're going to do now is after this, after you've written about each of your values, you're going to choose the one that just feels the most relevant to you. And again, this is highly imprecise, but it doesn't matter. It'd probably be effective to choose any of them, right? But try and pick the one that just you feel the most. And you'll probably have at least one or two that kind of rise to the top that feel more resonant or more applicable. So let's say this person, like wealth, is actually the value motivating this goal of publishing a book, right? And in some way, they feel like this is going to lead to some sense of kind of financial freedom or something like that. So to go deeper, you're going to go through a series of questions. You're going to do some more writing. And there's 3 questions that help you continue to clarify why that value really matters to you in the context of this goal. And that's really important too. It's why the value matters in the context of your particular goal. So the first question is, describe a time in the past when you lived out that value. So, and I put this in here because it's really common. And I can't think of anything. I've always been pretty bad with money. It's normal to hit like a block like that. Keep going, just keep writing. Something will come up eventually. So I remember my first job working in a bike shop. I didn't have much money, but I do remember how good it felt every other week to get a paycheck. Kind of like pride and excitement. I remember how empowering it felt knowing that if I really wanted to go to a movie, I could. Or if I really wanted to take my girlfriend out to a fancy restaurant, I could. Right? So you're giving color to this value that otherwise is just kind of abstract, wealth, right? Another one, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to have you guys do it in a second. Describe someone you admire for living out that value. So who's someone in your life who exemplifies that value? And these are all just ways to get you to clarify that value and make it rich and tangible. Because remember, the more clear it is, the more specific your value is, the more motivation it's going to have. Like back in our model here, the more specific and clear your value, like the bigger it is, and the more gravity it's going to exert. Meaning the more motivated you're going to feel moving toward it. Okay, and then the last question is, describe how you'd like to start living that value more in the future. So now you're putting yourself into it more, right? Like, what are some ways that I could live out that value? And again, there's no right answer here. You're brainstorming. You're just getting stuff out of your head. Okay. And then the final step is it's the visualization exercise, where you're literally, sounds cheesy, but it works. It's very effective. You're going to close your eyes, and you are going to imagine yourself living out that value. Right? And there's some questions there to kind of guide you if you want. So set the stage, right? If you're going to imagine sitting at your desk and getting a notification for your first royalty check after publishing your book, right? And you're going to imagine how much pride you feel and how excited that is, even though it's $2.50, you're still feeling surprisingly excited and awesome about that, right? So there, you're getting in touch with how you feel emotionally, right? What specifically are you doing or thinking? You imagine yourself rushing out of your room and shouting at your spouse, "Look how much I made!" Right? And again, this is this person for whom wealth is the value attached to publishing. But you're gonna you're essentially fantasizing, right? You're playing out in your imagination what this could look like. What are the results, right? If you were living out this value, right, what would the results be? Well, if I was really living out this value and I had more wealth in my life, I would have more free time, right? And you imagine yourself taking up some important hobby that you gave up a long time ago because you didn't have time for it. You imagine how good that feels, or you imagine being able to spend more time with somebody or whatever it is. Okay, I want to leave some time for you guys to actually practice this. Let me pause though. Does this make sense? Broad strokes. Okay. So any questions before? I'm going to have you guys run through it. And don't worry, it's going to be a little uncomfortable. It's going to be a little awkward. You're going to feel a little uncertain about stuff. That's fine. That's normal. But any questions before we dive in? I have you guys practice a little bit.
My question is, like, this seems like a really pretty well-defined list. Did it come from, did these prompts come from somewhere, or
yeah, good question.
Like, where did it come from, and how did it, and like, if it came from a study, what were the results of that?
Do you mean that this list specifically, or the whole process?
The whole kind of process thing.
No, this is not like a specific protocol that someone came up with, and this is my like mashup of various kind of exercises and approaches and stuff that I have found over the years to work well with people when it comes to increasing motivation and using values to do this. So like you can Google like personal values list, and you'll find all sorts of people have put together personal values lists, right? Or you can Google positive visualization, and you'll get scripts for how to do positive visualization. So this is my, like, over the years, reading and absorbing and trying all this stuff myself and with my clients and people I work with and all that kind of stuff. And so this is kind of like my process that I've developed for doing this. Good question. So, yeah.
I have a question, Nick.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Erin.
Well, how do you know if the goal is too vague or not specific enough?
Yeah, good question. So that, I don't want to sound like a cop-out, but that my basic answer to that is it's sort of a separate issue. Like that's a whole other thing, is like goal setting it's important, right? And it's definitely relevant to this, but it's just like, I could do a whole other workshop on goal setting and like how to think about scoping goals appropriately and how all that kind of stuff. But in general, I would say right now, don't worry about it. Okay. You will work your way into it. Like you'll get a feeling for what the appropriate sort of size goal is through experience. But there are like principles and guidelines for that kind of stuff. But the real answer, like so many things, is like you just kind of stumble around and you kind of figure out what works for you. I mean, in general, the smaller and the more specific it is, the easier it's going to be to get it done, right? But that also doesn't mean you shouldn't have big goals necessarily, right? Okay, yeah, Ganesh?
Yeah, so I have, kind of similar question, that you have to start with a goal and then look at values. And when you're looking at values, the values will keep changing for each of the goal?
Yes. Yeah. So generally you start with a goal, right? That's why I had you guys all the way back in the beginning. Think about situations where you wish you had more motivation.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
So it almost always is you're going to start with a goal. Now this is not like the 10 commandments, right? You guys can do whatever you want with this stuff. Okay. So if you can play with it. I'm giving you sort of a method. And again, like a lot of things in life, a pretty good process is learn the method, learn the traditional approach, and then break the rules after you've gotten good at the traditional approach, right? Like Jackson Pollock, the scatter painting guy, phenomenal classical painter. Like he could do amazing, like highly realistic, because he went to art school and like learned how to do, but then he broke off and like did his own thing. So anyway, that's I think a good, oops.
Yeah, I think the other question around values.
Sure.
I know, like you said, you kind of scan and see what comes up. but sometimes it's like, kind of hard, right? And in terms of choosing what values. Any other suggestions?
Yeah, so what you're looking for is some sort of an emotional reaction, like something kind of jumps out at you a little bit when you're scanning over these, right? But it's not necessarily going to be a big like aha moment where you're just like stunned with excitement or curiosity or something. It could also just be pretty like publishing a book, creativity, like that's pretty obvious, right? Like of course, like anyone who wants to publish a book, like I would imagine most people value creativity if they're trying to publish a book, right? Just like most people who want to exercise more consistently probably value health to some degree, right? So that's okay if they're kind of like boring and mundane connections. That's totally fine. But you might also get ones that are like a little bit more like you associate publishing a book with creativity, right? But like the example we gave, it was actually really pragmatic for this one person. They saw it as a way to make more money, basically. Or the one with adventurousness and exercise. So you might surprise yourself when you're scanning the list. You might not, but you just want to be open to that. Sometimes a value might pop out and go, oh yeah, like I wouldn't have necessarily put those two together, but maybe that is a value that could attach to this goal. Okay. And again, you'll get better at this. You'll get more comfortable with it the more you practice it. So there's only so much you can kind of figure out ahead of time. Again, like a lot of things, you learn by doing. But good question. Okay, so now I want to. Sorry. Go ahead.
Nick,
Someone else had a question.
Like for example, I feel like I lack of motivation cooking for people, and
Sure.
I'm kind of just wondering because I do like to cook. I just don't like to cook for a lot of people. I don't know why. But then I said, how can I motivate myself to do this, to cook for people? And then I have to attach that to friendship because, when you're cooking with people, then, you could do it for your friends and you be together with your friends, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. That's now, but keep in mind too, though, you kind of a presupposition here is that the goal is something you actually do want, right?
Yes.
That's a big.
But I do want friendship.
Yes, right. And so, but that's okay. Like goals can be a means to an end, right? Like, does anyone like filling out their taxes? Like, I don't think so. But it means I don't go to jail, right? So I do it. And it's helpful if I'm more motivated to do it rather than like dragging my feet and procrastinating. If I can just get it done, like that's better. Even though I don't like doing my taxes or find it particularly meaningful, some stuff you just got to get done. But I say that though, Carmen, because you do want to be careful of, sometimes there are goals that we don't need to do them and we don't actually even want to do them, but we kind of convince ourselves that we should. And that's a whole other topic, that kind of like self-deception around goals that we could get into, but you do want to be mindful of that, in the back of your head, is that sometimes there are goals that we actually don't want at all, but we're just kind of fooling ourselves into thinking we should want them. There's actually there's a great book on this topic. I'll link to it afterwards. It's called Wanting by a guy named Luke Burgess. It's really interesting. About why we want.
What is it called? Wanting?
Wanting.
Okay.
I did a review of it a couple years ago on my website. Anyway, okay. I want to have you guys go through this before we wrap up. And I'm going to stay on for a while to answer questions. The exercise will take us through the 60 minutes, but I'm going to stay on afterwards. So I know some of you probably have to go, but if you want to stay on and we can chat and answer questions about this as we go. So, okay. So step one, pick a goal, right? And for our purposes now, just like look at your list where you brainstorm initially and just pick one. Maybe one jumps out. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. It doesn't have to be the biggest one or the most important one. Just snag one. Okay. And then take a look at that values, and maybe you've already done this, but take a look at that values list that I sent around. And again, just scan it. Take a couple minutes and scan it and just mark, again, a handful. 3, 5, maybe 6 that you
Mhm.
think might be relevant. Okay.
Okay.
Carmen, sorry, I'm going to put you on mute. If you need to come off, go for it. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a minute to keep doing that. Okay. You've got your goal, and then you're gonna circle or pick a handful of values that might be relevant for that goal. Okay, now the next step is writing. So take any, we don't have time to do all of them, but take one or two of them and write a little bit about each one. Okay, really, there's no right way to do this. Kind of whatever comes to mind. Why do they matter? Why do these values matter to you? And again, try and be, the more specific, the better. Clarity is everything in this exercise. Okay, so we're gonna keep moving on. I know you probably feel rushed, but remember the point of this is just to give you guys kind of a taste of how to do this. The next step is first you're gonna pick one. You've got your goal. Now you're gonna settle on one value that you think is the best fit, the one that resonates most with your goal. So you're gonna pick that one. Then you're gonna answer this question about it. So describe a time in the past when you lived out that value. And then we're gonna do one more here. This next question, describe someone you admire for living that value out. Someone else you know who lives out that value, who exemplifies that value. Remember, specificity, set the stage. If you were describing to a friend how they live this out, you wouldn't just say, oh yeah, they're really courageous. You would describe what makes them courageous. You would show, don't tell. Okay, and we're gonna skip over the third question, and we're gonna go to the, for some people, the more intimidating part of this exercise. But it's really, once you start doing it, it's really fun, actually, and it's really the most powerful part. So we're going to visualize the value in action. Okay, so the writing has been kind of priming you for this. You've been setting the stage. You've been getting really specific about the value. And now you're gonna visualize it. You're gonna really kind of pull it all together and make it come to life for yourself. So you can close your eyes. You don't have to close your eyes if you want to, but I find it helps. And you're gonna imagine yourself living out the value. And we're just gonna do this for a couple minutes, and I'm gonna guide you through these questions. And what I want you to do is just in your mind, visualize it, like make up a story. From when you were a kid and you just imagined stuff and like made up stories in your head. That's what you're doing, okay? You're going to imagine yourself living out the values, and you can use my questions to kind of help guide you if you want. All right, close your eyes, think about your value, whatever it is. Now, set the stage. Where are you? You're living out this value. But before we get into what you're doing, what's the place like? Be as specific. Are you in a park, or at your house, your desk at work? Where are you? What's it look like? What's the weather? What time of day is it? Is it cold? Is it hot? Are there other people around you? Are you by yourself? Paint a picture. Remember, there's no right or wrong way to do this. You know, what are you doing? How are you actually living out this value? What's the action? If you were watching a video of yourself, what would you see? And think about how you actually feel physically in your body. Think about it. Are you relaxed? Are you tensed and excited? Emotionally, what emotions are you feeling right now? Happiness, joy, fear, curiosity, excitement. Mentally, what kind of thoughts are running through your head as you're doing this? And as you're living out this value, whatever that looks like for you, what are some of the results? What effect is it having on, it could be on you, but it could be on other people, the world around you. Remember, you're just imagining possibilities here. All right, open your eyes, come back. Values visualization. It's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward. It's not necessarily easy, especially at the beginning. But remember, all we're doing, there's nothing like mystical or woo-woo about this. If you think about it, like all your favorite stories, again, books, movies, plays, whatever it is, you like them because they're compelling. And why are they compelling? Because of the detail, the characters, the way they talk, the production design, the way it looks, the way they're lit, the lighting, like all the little details that go into a story is what makes it compelling to you. So that's what we're doing with values. We're giving them kind of a story, or we're making them compelling. We're making them sparkle, right? And when you do that, remember what happens? That value gets big. Its mass gets big. And along with mass comes gravity, right? Which in our terms is motivation, right? The bigger it gets, the more of a motivating pull it has on you. The less you have to push yourself, and the more your value is going to pull you toward that goal. Okay. Before I open it up for questions, I know it's time, so if you have to jump, no worries. But I'll stay on for a while, answer questions. But two things to keep in mind about like implementing this in practice. There's two different ways to do this. you can make it a regular practice. So if you have a pretty big goal that you would like to be more motivated toward, I would recommend doing this consistently, right? So you might every morning or every evening or twice a week or something, maybe even just once a week, you set aside a time and you go through this process. And maybe you do a different value each time, right? If you're writing a book, right? You want to write a book. Maybe every Sunday evening, that's part of your routine, is that you do values visualization, this process. You spend, you sit down with a notebook and you spend 20 minutes going through this process, right? So you make it a regular practice. It's also really useful in the heat of the moment, right? So if you're working on my image here of the brownie, right? Like eating more healthily, you feel yourself reaching for the junk food, the snack. You don't have to do the whole process, obviously, but you can very briefly, like you can close your eyes and you say, wait, I know I don't want to do this. Why? What's the value motivating me to resist eating the junk food or checking social media or like whatever it is, whatever that competing goal is. So you can literally take 30 seconds, close your eyes, imagine the value that might be associated with the actual goal. So you can use it in the moment to sort of like short circuit that unhelpful behavior that you're feeling pulled toward. And of course you can do both. That's really the best combination, is when you're doing it regularly as a regular practice, right? You're building up that sense of like, what are the values behind this goal? Then you're using it as a tool in the moment too. And that's the best when you're doing it like that. So a few more kind of pragmatic suggestions, and then I'll get to questions. I know some people have been putting stuff in the chat. I will get to those. I would recommend working on one goal at a time. So I would recommend really trying this, diving into this, but do one goal at a time for like a 30-day period. You really want to give this a chance to kind of have effect. I wouldn't hop around from like goal to goal, especially not in the beginning. Once you really learn and internalize the process, again, once you learn, you can do whatever you want, break the rules. But my recommendation would be kind of narrow with it at the beginning. Pick one goal at a time and do it for a sustained amount of time. Like 30 days is pretty nice. Remember, don't get perfectionistic about it. Like most exercises, doing it consistently is much more important than doing it perfectly. Right? So just about any, like practicing violin, right? Would you rather have like one perfect practice session every month, or like daily pretty good practice sessions? And Paige is nodding. I'm going with daily. I'm not a musician, but like I think that's probably the best. Create your own values list. So I've given you this list as just a starting point, but actually ideally you want to do what I did, which is this is a list that I put together slowly over the year, like thinking about my own values, but also looking at other people's values list, or even I'll just be reading something and I'll think like, oh, that's a cool value I never really thought about. And I just sort of add it to my list. So I would keep a list somewhere. It can be a file on your computer, it can be in your journal somewhere, whatever. But keep a list of personal values that are especially meaningful or relevant to you, even if you don't have a use for them right away. You might be having a conversation with a friend, and you'll realize like curiosity is like an important value for me. I don't have a particular goal that that's relevant to right now, but like I'm putting it on the list. It'll probably be useful down the line. And then lastly, experiment with different goal value pairings. So what I would recommend is you go through the process and you settle on, if maybe, exercising consistently is the goal and health is the value. We'll do that for a while, but if you feel like it's kind of like, maybe it's not working as well as you would like, don't like switch it up, like try a different value for a while, like try attaching that one there. But you want to be experimental with these pairings of goals and values. Okay, that's a lot. Thank you guys for hanging in there with me. I hope that was helpful. Let's chat a little bit. I want to look at the chat because I know people put some questions in there. Aaron said visualizing the value was difficult at first. I was thinking more about visualizing the goal, and then of course negative self-talk got in the way. Yeah, thank you for bringing this up, Aaron. This is super normal, especially at the beginning, right? Your negative self-talk will pop up like crazy. part of the downside of doing a visualization exercise is that you are, by cutting off a lot of stimulus, right, in your life, you're opening up more of a, like, your negative self-talk has a bigger stage because it's not competing with as much stuff, right? But that, I think you find that it's like a lot of new things. Anytime you're doing something new, it's uncomfortable, it's kind of awkward, and your inner critic is going to pop up and start, why are you doing this? This is stupid. Like, this isn't working. How come you can't do this? Blah, blah, blah. We all know the scripts, right? But it is difficult. Like, it is a new thing, and there is a level of difficulty and uncomfortableness with doing something like this. But again, I would just say it's not special. This is like just about everything in life. Any kind of skill or practice is kind of weird and uncomfortable at first, and you're not familiar with it, right? And that's totally okay. Doing this exercise, even if you have negative self-talk popping up all the time, it's still helpful.
Right.
Right. Did you want to elaborate on that a little bit more?
No, but I think there's another comment that was similar about it was hard to separate visualizing the goal versus just visualizing the value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you're doing this step, so step 3, visualizing the value in action, it doesn't have to be attached to the goal. It could be, right? So I'm in another like example I think of this is I had a guy who was, it was the same goal, exercising regularly, but health was his value. And so the thing, it took him a while to kind of get into this, but the time we were doing one of the visualizations together, and when it really clicked for him was he started visualizing, he said he visualized himself as his like younger 40-year-old. He was an older gentleman, he's like 70 or something. He visualized his like middle-aged self when he was young and he was in shape and he was like energetic, but he imagined himself in his younger body, but at his current age playing with his grandkids, right? Like, and he would like run around, he was like playing catch with his grandson, which he couldn't normally do because he was so out of shape that he would get out of breath. And so it wasn't related to his goal of exercising, but his value of health. Part of that meant I can play with my grandkids without getting winded, right? And like how great that feels to like feel like I'm young again. And I can play catch with my grandson.
I visualize.
Go ahead,
like
Carmen.
I also had the value. Yeah, I had also my value was health, and we love to walk in the beach. By the just very close to the water with my husband, and we do that a lot around 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So I was walking there with him, and I saw all the sun moving away, and it was like very clear. And that was, it was actually very powerful because I love doing that. So
I love it. That's perfect. It's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So and you can imagine how, Carmen, like if that's you can imagine how if you were struggling with, sorry, I'll take this off of the screen share. If you were struggling in the moment with whether to follow through on some goal around health, if you just took 20 seconds and did that and like visualized it, your motivational landscape would be completely different after that 20 seconds. It's not a foolproof way. It's not always going to work, right? But even if, think about it, even if 30% of the time it helps you kind of get over the line and actually stick with whatever that goal, that's huge. That's enormous, right? If you could package that effect in a pill, it would be the best-selling drug ever invented. Right? If you could, but thank you, Carmen, for sharing that. I think that's a really great example. Yeah. Okay, Joni said, I'm having trouble differentiating between my goal and my value. Yeah, good question, Joni. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Hi. So I kind of got stuck at the list of values, and I started one and then I crossed it off. And so by the time you run the other steps, I was still trying to figure out the values. No, it's okay. I'm slow at that. It's a lot for me to try to figure out what fits. Decisiveness is not one of my values. So I was a little all over the place. And then I didn't know whether so I guess I still had the goal in mind, and am I visualizing the goal as it's living itself out? I didn't know how to transition from letting go of that goal to just embracing the values and sticking with the values regardless of the goal?
Yeah, good question. So I should be more clear on this. First of all, the distinction between goal and value. So here's a silly example that I think gets at it. Your goal is I'm going to go to the North Pole and visit Santa Claus, right? I want to talk to Santa Claus. That's my goal, right? How do I get there, right? The value is like the North Star. Like if I follow the North Star, that will lead me in the direction of the North Pole and Santa Claus. The North Star isn't, it's not where, it's not the.
Is it a process matter?
It's it's kind of, again, it's kind of two things. It's the direction. It's not the destination, it's the direction is one way to think about it, right? So like if your goal is exercising, right? That's a thing you can do it. You can't do a value. You can't do health, right? You can't do courage. You can you can speak up and like stand up for a coworker during a meeting when they're being criticized. And that might be an act of courage. You can't do courage, right? You do things that are courageous. So values they're usually adjectives or descriptors of things. But the point is that goals are specific actions.
Okay.
Right? So that should help to some degree.
So is it like
right?
I like to visualize a path that I'm on. So I'm path and I'm going in this direction. The goals at the end. What does the path look like? Is this what the path looks like?
I don't know what the path is. I think you can think about the value as like you can think the North Star like a compass, right? What does a compass do? Like it shows you the direction, like north. So I know
Right.
I want to get to the North Pole, and to get to the North Pole, I have to go that direction, right? But go ahead.
Can I explain something?
Sure,
Okay.
Carmen.
For me, the value is the end. I think that's what the confusion is. And the exercises, I am doing it so I can stay healthy. Even though the goal for me is to exercise, that's just my immediate goal. But the final goal is for me to be healthy, because in able to be healthy, I first have to achieve this goal that is exercise. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think
Values
that's
are the things are the important things in life for me. And from those values, I really derive my goals. I mean, if you think about it, what's important for me in life is my values. What do I value? My health. Okay. What am I going to do and able to have my health? I have to exercise. So that's
Sure.
my immediate goal. That's how I see it, and maybe that's the confusion.
That's a good way to look at it, is that the goal is the input and the value is the output, right? The goal is the thing you're doing, and it leads to
what really
the value,
is what you want. Yeah.
or some aspect of the value. Yep.
I mean, that's how I see it.
The other thing is, don't get super hung up on the distinction between the two. Like presumably you have goals. Like it's not super hard to figure out what your goals are, the things you want to do that you don't have enough, like you feel like you wish you were more motivated to do, right? If you're not totally clear on so again, you just pick a goal, and then one of these things, whether you can define it well or not, this seems related to the goal. This seems helpful for me to be thinking about when it comes to my goal, right? So if my goal is exercise, right? Adventurousness, like what is that? I don't know exactly what that is, but like when I think about adventure, right? That helps me, it makes me excited to do that goal of exercising regularly, right? So it's tricky, and it's definitely not you, Joni. Like I get this question all the time. Like it's just kind of hard. But what I can tell you is the more you practice the process, the more it'll kind of click for you. It's murky at first, but you'll start to get it more as you practice it, and as you practice with different things, with different goals and values. But Joni, let me give you a chance to. Did you want to follow up?
No, I'd love to watch somebody walk through the steps. I'd
Well,
love to observe.
So if you mean outside of the, because that's kind of what I was trying to do with these ones, right? So I'm saying my goal is to, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not screen sharing here. My goal, publish a book, right? I want to write a book. And I think about these things, values, whether I'm not even sure what a value is, but these are just things that like, and some of them seem pretty related to writing, like, yeah, like I love being creative, right? And I love like learning new things, right? Maybe learning, maybe that's the thing. Like, why do I want to write a book? Because I just love learning new stuff. And so actually writing a book is a way for me to learn new stuff, right? It keeps me learning new stuff. To write a book, you have to learn a ton of stuff and package it all together and right. So, okay, I'm going to do that. Like learning, like why do I love learning? I love that feeling of like excitement and curiosity of like not knowing something and then moving toward it, and like the aha moments when you finally like something clicks, and then sharing. I love sharing like new things I learned with other people. I love that like feel the excitement of, you know, other people like learning together with me, whatever. I'm just rambling here, but like you're tapping into something that's really important to you, like learning. And then this stuff is just more of the same. This is just more ways to get you to elaborate on specifically why learning really matters to you, right? So describe a time in the past when you lived out that value, right? Like, oh, when I was, you know, whatever it is, my computer died, right? And I didn't have enough money to like have it repaired. And so I had to learn how to fix it myself. And it was like super frustrating, but like, it was so gratifying and empowering afterwards when I figured it out on my own, how to like fix it. And like, I remember that time. So that's an example of me living out that value of learning, like the importance of learning. So you go through this, and then when you've got some goal, right? Like, let's say you are trying to finish your degree. Maybe you didn't finish your degree in college, right? You left early. You've got one more class you have to take, but you're really dragging your feet. It's like accounting. You guys can tell I'm not a numbers person. I keep harping on taxes and accounting. There presumably are people who like doing taxes and accounting stuff. But you're dragging your feet on this class. You're just not getting it done. But if you can remember that in most situations, you actually love learning, right? And there's a lot of ways that maybe you could kind of rekindle some of that love, even though it's a class you don't particularly like. And so when you're visualizing, you might visualize yourself in that class, learning something, even though it seems boring and superficial initially. You might, whatever, there's all sorts of scenarios where you could imagine the excitement of learning, like coming into even a class you're not especially interested in. So that's kind of the process. But again, I think you have to play with it to get more of a feel for it.
Thanks, that's helpful.
Okay. And then remember, I give you guys the script, so you'll have some instructions there for it. Okay, let me go back to the chat and look at messages. Let's see. Sam said, it seems like values are the reason why you want to do something. The goal is something that you want to do. I think that might be the distinction. Yeah, Sam, like that's another good way to think about it, is it's the why behind a goal. Or you can actually think about it as you know, I've sort of framed it as values give you motivation, but as Sam sort of alluded to, you could actually think about it as values are the motivation. The only reason we do things is because they're valuable to us, right? In some way or another, right? So Sam, that's helpful, I think.
It seems
But
like oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sam.
no, you go ahead, Sam.
All right. When you said the words, I think there was a couple of them examples that you gave, but one of them was some guy was trying to work out so he could be healthy for his grandkids. That sounded like it. I'm not sure what value he chose to like come to that point of, oh, hey, this is the reason, this is the actual reason why. But it's like saying like health, I guess, would be that value, but I think it'd be more motivating to say, yeah, I actually want to be there for my grandkids, would be the actual value, not the quote unquote just one word description of what the more personalized version is.
Yes, and that's this idea of, I'm gonna share my screen real quick. There's a world of difference between a one-word value and a clarified value, which is like how it actually shows up in life, right? It's a specific instance of it, right? If you say the word courage, right? Like, oh yeah, that's a nice word, but it only has power, it only has meaning and impact when you think of it being lived out, when you think of, a character from your favorite novel who exhibits courage, or when you think of a time when you were really courageous, or so when it's when it has specificity to it is when it has that motivating power. Sam, just like you said, health on its own, it's a value, but it's not particularly motivating. Right? It only becomes motivating when it's really clear and it's got specificity and detail to it. So playing with being healthy enough to play with my grandkids, there's where it starts getting motivating. Okay, Janie or Janny? Say Janie. Is it Janie or Janny? My goal is decreasing carbon emissions in the world. My value is adventure because making it happen is scary and unknown, and adventure is fun. Yeah, I like that. So you could tie this this value of adventure, which is kind of intrinsically fun and exciting for you, right? You could, when it gets kind of discouraging, when you think about this goal of decreasing carbon emissions in the world, right? If you're sort of reframing it in terms of how can I make this sort of an adventure and adventurous rather than something kind of scary and terrifying. This is good too. My value is mastery because self-discipline is too difficult and mastery is kinder to myself. I love that. Sometimes choosing different values is interesting because whether you know it or not, you're using a particular value to motivate yourself already, like self-discipline. Like, I need to be more self-disciplined. I really admire people who are disciplined, blah, blah, blah. And maybe for you, that value isn't actually working that well. It's not actually that motivating. But if you substitute a different one that's related, like mastery, right? Getting really good at something, maybe it turns out that's actually much more motivating. So I love that example, Jenny. And that's the kind of thing that you can stumble upon when you do this exercise, right? You're gonna discover little things like that. So it's really, this exercise is really tactically, it's really useful for literally, following through on your goals and increasing your motivation. But it's secretly, like reading between the lines, that this exercise is tremendously helpful for self-awareness generally. Like you will learn a lot about yourself if you do this consistently.
The carbon emissions one, I went to my sister's house and I looked out of her apartment window and it had the motorway underneath her window and all the cars zooming past. And that really was my picture for motivation to decrease carbon emissions throughout the world. But that's my overall goal, but my steps to that goal would be I'm already doing things to reduce carbon emissions for myself, but I would like to buy an electric car so that I don't have to drive a petrol car.
Sure.
So that's my first step. But that picture of the motorway underneath the window was just so motivating, and I would have put courage as my goal because but courage means scary and unknown and you have to face it, whereas adventure is making it fun to do. So for example, if you have to I was visualizing a press conference
Okay.
being in the center of a press conference, having to talk about reducing carbon emissions, my own journey, and what I think the world should do. And if I pictured it as an adventure, I didn't get anxiety and panic and think I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this, it's too difficult. And adventure as a value made the difference to make it more fun and more achievable.
I love it. It's such a good example of kind of personalizing this and kind of making it your own. Really, really cool. It reminds me of one of my favorite studies was this study. It looked at an intervention for helping people with anxiety. And the entire intervention, the whole technique was you reframing anxiety as excitement. Because actually, physiologically, anxiety and excitement are the exact same thing. When you're excited, if you were hooked up to a bunch of sensors and stuff, like a doctor couldn't tell whether you were excited or anxious. Physiologically, it's the same thing. It's adrenaline, your heart rate's up, you're breathing faster, all that kind of stuff. So literally telling people just to say, I'm anxious, actually, I'm feeling really excited. It's uncomfortable, but I'm excited. Tremendously reduced people's anxiety. So just reframing is really powerful. And this, like reframing values, can be really powerful with motivation too. So thanks, Janny, for sharing that. All right, folks, we got to jump. Any quick last minute questions before we go? Yeah, Erin.
Earlier when you showed the spaceship and the two goals, I just found it interesting that you said to get to the bigger goal, you don't need to use more energy, or that just really blew me away. Because I mean, I always think of like you just have to fight through it and tough it out, and that is, I'm still doubting a little bit, but that is,
it's interesting when you look at people, when I look at people who I admire for being very, whatever it is, like very productive or very creative or even very kind or all sorts of things. There's this weird thing where it's like they're just sort of pulled to that naturally, right? They're not like pushing and like gritting it out constantly, right? That is not a sustainable way to move yourself anywhere.
Right.
Right. I think about that as like that kind of tough it out thing. It's like your emergency brake in your car. Like maybe once a year, twice a year, you use it, right? But if you're using that on a regular basis, like that is not the way to use a car. That is not what it's for. It's so that kind of gritted out willpower, it's good to have in a pinch every once in a while. It can maybe move you a little bit. But the real secret is in harnessing the energy that's already out there in the environment, right? Kind of tapping into that energy. And it's there, like your values are there. They are attached, but they're not clarified. We don't clarify our values enough. And the more you clarify them, the more you make them real, right? The more powerful and motivating they become. And the more effortless is a little too strong of a word, but the more you are pulled toward your goals rather than having to push toward them.
Yes,
which is the sustainable way to get stuff done, whatever your goals are.
Yes, that was really good.
Yeah, Joni, the spark. I like that. That's a good metaphor for it. Absolutely. The potential is already in there. It just needs a spark. And so when you clarify those values, that's what you're doing. All right. Thank you all. This was great. Great questions, great comments. Really appreciate it. I'll send around a follow-up email. You guys will be on it, but it'll have links to the recording and the handout and that kind of stuff. But thanks so much. Nice to see you all. All right, take care.
Thank you.